The category is What the Trans, darlings?
Hello. Welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans?
Ashley, so I've been seeing on the various social medias that we both share that you have made a friend.
I have, yes. I've made a new friend who just sort of magically arrived on my balcony one night. Because this friend of mine is a pigeon, and so it's this very well-kept, suspiciously well-groomed pigeon, in fact, with a little tag on its leg, and I've not managed to get close enough to actually see what it says, but it looks like it's a little yellow tag on this suspiciously well-kept pigeon, and it seems to have been a little dazed and stuff, so we've been putting seeds and water out for it, and unfortunately now I think it thinks it lives here now, and it's like, oh, okay, that's fine, little buddy. You just have that corner and go and shit somewhere else. No, you're not shitting somewhere else. All right, never mind. So, yes, a pigeon buddy. Perhaps it's my new familiar. Who can say?
I didn't think that pigeons had the psychological ability to, like, have friends and owners and be pets.
Well, I mean, homing pigeons are a thing, aren't they? So there's that whole, they can be kind of trained, and birds are quite smart, and they do have ways of navigating and stuff. So
I've lived in London too long. To me, they're just rats with wings at this point.
And that's fair enough. But no, as soon as I saw it, I was like, no, this is not a standard city flying rat. So anyway, how are you? You were getting all performative earlier today, weren't you?
I was, because my life as a thing makes total sense. I have been facilitating a mental health recovery course, and it has just ended with everyone on the course and the quote-unquote teachers, including me, doing a little bit of Vogue dancing on Shakespeare's stage at the Globe Theatre.
Nice.
It absolutely was nice, but it's also, if you'd asked me a year ago where I thought I'd end up, in December of 2019, I would never have said on the Shakespeare stage doing my own posing.
Yes, absolutely. It's just there's quite a lot to unpack there, isn't it? Really, it's like it's voguing, and it's the Globe Theatre where I've been there a couple of times, and also it's you who not to say that you shouldn't go out and engage in such activities. It's just it wasn't what I was expecting. So
I wasn't expecting it. I just got a call one day many months ago saying, "Yo, Michelle, do you want to help out with this course we're running?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. I'll go and try and empower some LGBT people, because there's an LGBT thing, all about body confidence and all this other stuff." And there was a whole bunch of students, and I was just basically there to run them through some exercises. And then one day my boss just like, "Oh yeah, we're going to be on this Globe stage next. That's what we're doing in December." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, we're a professional dancing group now."
I mean, were you getting paid?
I mean, yeah, I was getting paid my rate as facilitator, so officially I'm a professional dancer
You are
at this
technically
point.
a professional dancer. That is brilliant. Well done.
Especially well done, because if anyone has ever seen me dance, they will know that I have no dancing ability whatsoever. And I'm pretty sure I let the side down in that I didn't know where I was half the time. We had to wear ruffs because we were at the Shakespeare's Globe, we all had a ruff on. Mine fell off halfway through, so I just ended up flinging it, trying to sachet it away from me, but it ended up landing in the audience somewhere. I've never seen it since. So yeah, overall I let the side down, but the side was so strong it didn't matter. So yeah, that's what I did just an hour ago before we started recording this.
That does sound a bit rough. Oh, sorry. No, that's awesome, and I wish you the best of luck in your new career.
I never want to dance again.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, and I'm never gonna dance again. Okay, so I discovered I'm like a bird mom, and you're a dancer. Brilliant. What else can we discover this week?
I don't know, probably something terrible and news related. That seems to be our thing, right?
That is definitely our thing. So let's get right into it. So, an article in eNeuro looked at existing studies of gender dysphoria, a process called a meta-analysis. You take a load of studies about one particular thing, and then you kind of study the studies and come to a broad conclusion based on the evidence in the studies that have already been done. So, brains are complicated, it turns out, but in an effort for us to keep it brief, a chap called Stephen Gliske from the University of Michigan, who is a research assistant professor of neurology, he said that the evidence suggests that brain networks that are linked to how individuals perceive the ownership of their body parts and that influence, shall we say, gender typical behavior, and that are related to chronic distress, are experienced differently by those with gender dysphoria compared to those without it. So it's a difference in brain processing, essentially. The way your brain does stuff is different when you are trans, which I think we kind of knew that in some ways, but basically the findings that he's written up about seem to contrast with other findings that suggest that trans people's brains align more closely with their actual gender rather than the one they were assigned at birth, although where exactly that leaves non-binary people, I don't know. However, the concerning part of this is that Gliske also suggested that feelings of gender dysphoria and distress could potentially be treated at their root cause by using drugs or other therapies to affect your neural pathways. That's right, doing something to your brain rather than your body that will basically not make you not trans anymore. So that's eugenics right there. That's what that looks like. Other neurologists, scientists, experts in ethics and law have criticised Gliske's conclusion, with Simona Giordano from the University of Manchester actually putting it best by suggesting that any treatment of this kind would be an attempt to get rid of gender incongruence and amounts to a form of medical conversion, and a lot of other people in similar fields also weighed in with very, very similar observations. So, yes, scientists openly suggesting, hey, let's see if we can get rid of trans people, you know? So that's kind of bad, I thought. What do you...
Kind of bad?
Little bit. But we have spoken about this before, haven't we? About the kind of morality of looking for, quote unquote, the gay gene or the trans gene or whatever it is that makes people gay or trans or left-handed or whatever. I understand the impulse to understand. You know, you're curious, but at the same time, it's like, well, what would we use that for? You know, if we can then say, oh, well, this genetic combination indicates that a person can be trans, and we can tell that before a child is born, there would be people that would choose to say, oh, well, no, I don't want that. I'm going to not give birth to this particular child and try again. Anyway, yeah, that's a whole morality of science thing. Like, don't tell us we don't give you variety on this podcast. But getting back to, I guess, newsy stuff, let's move on because, that's right, we've only got an hour, haven't we? Right, I've got to hurry up. So, coming back to the UK, but not specifically talking about party politics, is you may remember from June last year, 2018, when we reported on the case of Christie Elan-Cane, who is a non-gendered activist who has been campaigning for 20-odd years to have X markers included as an option for UK passports. Now, the High Court chose to dismiss the case in June of last year, but Elan-Cane was back at the Court of Appeal back on December the 3rd, appealing against the decision by the High Court, arguing that the current lack of an X marker on passports was discriminatory. Now, at the time, the Home Office said that the current system for recognising gender is administratively coherent, which I absolutely had a good laugh about when I read it. The Home Office has, I feel, relied on a certain amount of special pleadings, saying that although non-gendered X markers on passports have been brought in for citizens in several states in the US, Canada, Denmark, Malta, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Pakistan, Ireland, India, and Nepal, it totally wouldn't work in the UK because we're just so fucking special. So Elan-Cane and Pear legal team argue that the current system is contradictory and inherently discriminatory. People with X markers on passports visit the UK from the countries I've just listed, and their passports are considered valid when they do so. So Dr. Peter Dunn, who is an expert on gender identity and law, said during the High Court case, the government put forward several reasons why X markers wouldn't be possible, including fears of identity fraud and the risk of making the system incoherent, which if they were genuinely worried about that, they'd have done the work already, because it's pretty Kafkaesque as it is. And obviously Dr. Dunn has then gone on to point out that it is currently unclear if these arguments actually stand up to scrutiny. And so, yes, that's where we're at. The Court of Appeal is going to hear the case, so more on it when that takes place. But the initial hearing was on the 3rd, and there we are. It's got knocked back, and it's being pushed forward again, which is good. What do you think?
I've sort of been on and off following this case for years now, because it's definitely I've reported on it for Pink News years ago, back when I was doing stuff there, and sort of been following it in and out. And Elan-Cane has been doing this dance with the government for the best part of 30 years at this point.
95.
Yeah, like, her persistence is ridiculous. Like,
it is.
This is a person who has been arguing for essentially non-binary options and non-gendered options on a variety of government forms and legal recognition for all sorts of people far longer than people believe that non-binary people have been a thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Although, that whole concept of people who are not, neither male nor female is not something that is brand spanking new, as various cultures from all over the world from thousands of years ago would be able to demonstrate. Elan-Cane's an absolute legend, to be perfectly honest. As you say, the persistence is astonishing. But I do think that it's a good point, isn't it? And per absolutely right in the things that are being said and the arguments that the legal team are making. I just, I hope this one pans out better, essentially, and that the government actually listen this time. But given the state of the government at the moment, even if the Court of Appeals rule that the High Court have to hear it again, and then that goes well, that doesn't mean that the government will just jump to its feet and sort it out immediately, because that's just not how it works.
Yeah, I think the situation will vary wildly depending on who actually wins. Like, I could see the Conservative Party getting their Attorney General all up in arms and getting them to appeal. I could totally see the Conservative Party doing that. The Labour Party, less so. I think the Labour Party would probably be all right. Okay, we were kind of hinting at doing this kind of thing anyway. Not directly in the manifesto, just via random tweets from random people in the party.
And, things that have been expressed by people like Dawn Butler, for example,
that is true. I'm being too harsh on Labour.
They're not a monolith, are they? But Dawn Butler indeed went so far as to describe current provisions for trans people and recognition to be a fucking disgrace here on this very podcast.
Well, she ain't wrong.
She is not. So we shall see. I think a couple of the parties have made firm commitments for GRA reform, but that's us talking about the election again. Damn it. Right.
We'll be following this case as it develops, and we will bring you updates as and when we know things. Whereas right now, we do not.
Yes, indeed. And as a news podcast, that's more or less as much as we can promise. Anyway, moving on. So, a little while ago, we reported on the rather splendid news that India's Supreme Court had chosen to decriminalise homosexuality, which was fantastic. That was a, colonial British-era anti-gay law, which has been on the books since the 1800s, and was finally repealed, and many, many LGBT people all over India celebrated. So, things we thought were heading in a splendid, super direction, and India's trans rights bill has now passed both houses and is waiting for the presidential seal of approval. However, it's actually really bad. It's not good. It's been really heavily protested already and has been described by a couple of activists. Well, one of the activists in India who I saw a film clip of this about, describing it as just devastating. The bill requires a trans person to basically apply to a magistrate for a certificate to say that they are trans, which actually goes against another Supreme Court of India third gender ruling, which affirmed that trans people are protected by the same rights as all other citizens under the Constitution of India. It also granted the right to self-identify as male, female, or as third gender. So this bill goes against that. Worse, in the event that the application is rejected by the magistrate, there is no process to appeal that decision. And even worse, if the applicant is granted a certificate and is later the victim of a sexual assault, the penalties given to the offenders would be significantly less than they would be for other victims of hate crime.
There's a lot to unpack there.
That is a lot, isn't it? And I saw a thing that was, India's trans rights bill is with the president. I was like, oh wow, I completely haven't been paying attention to that at all. That sounds great. Click. Oh god, no. And this is obviously there have been a lot of protests in a large number of cities actually in India that have been protesting against this bill because it is that's shocking. That's they've got something very right with the Supreme Court decision last year, and this bill just kind of defies that completely and gets things terribly wrong and is dehumanizing, essentially, and kind of denying people their fundamental civil rights, I feel. So, yeah, that's bad.
What problem are they trying to fix with this law, this new policy? Like, what issue are they trying to lessen or stop? I don't understand.
I wonder if I don't know. I wonder if it's they're trying to do a keeping track thing, somewhat like. So the gender recognition certificate, obviously, here in the UK, is the method of legal gender recognition for trans people. It is needlessly bureaucratic and very difficult to negotiate, and all sorts of other things that we've talked about at length before. I wonder if the Indian government were essentially prompted to do a trans rights bill specifically because of unique challenges and people being able to legally change their names and driver's license and whatever. But the way that has been done is not good. And so kind of obviously the bill is now with the president of India, so I'm now hoping that it is kind of sent back down, with in red pen, where he's written on it like, very poor, 2 out of 10, see me, do it again kind of thing. Fingers crossed, but unsure.
That doesn't explain the very strange part where, I mean, I don't know how your average sexual assaulter person thinks, but if somebody who a successful trans person or Hijra person or other gender variant person in India successfully gets this certificate saying you are a tran, suddenly sex offenders who choose those people as victims get lesser punishments than if they went after people without the certificate.
Yeah, pretty much.
Isn't that just putting a huge target on trans people's backs to be like, well, no one gives a shit about these people, have at it, and if you get caught, you'll get less of a prison sentence. Isn't that nice?
Pretty much, yes. It's kind of declaring an open season type thing, isn't it? And obviously, at this time of year, with Trans Awareness Week and Trans Day of Remembrance being at the end of November, it's like that's kind of been in our thoughts recently, and this is simply going to encourage violence against gender non-conforming people and denying them any kind of...
So this has been a pretty dark week, like existentially, for trans people around the world. This has been quite dark.
Yes, I didn't realise that when I was putting these stories together, but I had to choose 3 that weren't related to the election, and these were the 3 that I chose, and so that probably tells you something about the existential darkness at the core of Ashley more than anything else. But
well, no, like, I mean, it's not necessarily that easy to collect news when you are a niche news podcast at a time like this where it seems like everyone is getting wrapped up in election stuff. Like, I don't even think there was really that much in the trans community that we could have reported, because it does genuinely feel like everyone has got a political party on their t-shirt and they're going out and banging on doors, which, all the power to them. So, I'm not going to say that you have, like, made a very, very dark show unnecessarily. I understand that I left you to do the news because I was too busy dancing on the Globe stage and doing the next thing, which we're going to come up to very shortly.
Indeed.
But at the same time, there wasn't a single happy thing, not one happy thing in the world, actually, we could have reported on today.
I mean, so there's a couple of quick things we could talk about, actually. So,
you do have some joy.
I do. I mean, I told you about the pigeon, didn't I?
Oh, that's true. Yes. Okay. I'm not sure the pigeon is going to be enough to fight, eugenics and outright legislative trans bashing.
Well, okay, all right. So there's some good news. It's just for some reason I elected to ignore it. So, but Radio 1 have announced that there's going to be a non-binary presenter on the Christmas takeover.
Yeah, Jacob. I actually had the pleasure of working with them very recently on a project. They are good people, and I cannot wait for that. So yeah, tell the story.
No, that was it. I've literally just sort of read that. So,
well, that's some good news. going to have some non-binary goodness on the BBC.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got to say I do not listen to Radio 1, and actually Radio 1's just like, oh, this Radio 1, is it? Let's see if I can put something else on, So,
yeah, I mean, we're both over 30.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it now. We've got to start going slowly over to Radio 2.
Yeah, it's not even all that slowly, really. Although, mostly, it's not the radio. It's fucking podcasts, because it is the 21st century. So, no, it's apologies for filling everything with terrible news, but that at least used to be the name of the segment, didn't it? There is also for basically, I'm about to do a job advertisement, if that's all right. So, if you are of an academic turn of mind, there is a project called the Trans Learning Project, which has a job up at the moment for a research coordinator. The idea is that this person's going to, as the job title would suggest, coordinate research, and it's very suitable for someone with an academic turn of mind who perhaps might have experience in matters of gender already. And actually, the job description does suggest that a PhD would be super good. So this is sort of quite high-level stuff. We'll include some information and a job description in the episode description. So if you know somebody who you think might be interested, feel free to share it with them, or obviously look over it yourself and come and do some interesting, thoughtful, and non-exploitative research into the needs of the trans community.
I wonder how many PhD folks are listening to this right now. I mean, I don't know what our audience necessarily does for a living. I know that they are very passionate and awesome.
Yes.
And thank you very much for all the lovely tweets that you keep sending
Indeed.
us all the time. It's great. Please send more at What the Trans. Anyway, I would be very interested to know how many PhD people we have out there. In fact, if you have a PhD and you listen to the show, please get in touch on our Twitter at What the Trans, or on Facebook /What the Trans, or on our website, which is about to die because we've got a whole new one in the wings ready to go. But our old one for now is whatthetranspod.tumblr.com. We're going to be leaving Tumblr.
We are.
For pasturesjot.com.
Yes.
That's going to be happening very soon.
Indeed.
But for now, go there and tell us about your PhD. If you've done a PhD, if you're doing one, if you plan on doing one. I want to know how many, fucking doctors listen to this show.
Yeah.
Are PhDs doctors?
Yes. Yeah, indeed. And the other fun thing about doctors, of course, is that Doctor Who is back in January. And it's got like the gayest Doctor Who poster I've ever seen. It's got like a rainbowy space thing, and the tagline is "Space for All." And it's like, wow, you guys are just nailing it, aren't you? I love it. So yeah,
they're just leaning into the fact that the Daily Mail hate them. They're just leaning into that, aren't they?
Well, they should, frankly, because that's the one mark of you doing something right is if the Daily Mail hates you. So, we wanted to at least take a little bit of time not talking about the election. However, we finished that, and now we're going to talk about the election. Michelle.
So yeah, earlier on this week, I sat down and had a good conversation with Helen Belcher. Some of you will be familiar with that name. She has been around the trans community doing various things for decades. She is something of a veteran when it comes to the fight for trans equality. She's done lots and lots of work for Trans Media Watch and many, many other people. Mm-hmm. But her latest role is as a parliamentary candidate for Chippenham. There are several people, trans and non-binary, who are actually standing in this election, but it's been widely reported that Helen Belcher is the one who is the most likely to be successful in seeking a seat in the Houses of Parliament, which is quite exciting.
Indeed.
Helen Belcher, chances are likely she could be the UK's first transgender MP. So that's exciting. That would be quite a symbolic victory for the trans community. And so I wanted to sit down with her and get to the bottom of what it's like to be a trans candidate out there.
On the campaign trail.
On the campaign trail, which to our American listeners is nothing like you lot do it. Like, you lot have cannons and stuff. Our MPs are equivalent to senators, basically just walk around in town halls and villages and stuff, just knocking on doors. It's really not that glamorous. So I sat down and talked with her for a good long while, and, well, I think I'll let you lot listen to what was said, and then we will get back to a certain thing that will come up. So yeah, here is the interview. Hello, Helen Belcher. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to me today. How's it going?
I'm fine, thanks, Michelle. I mean, election campaigns are always terribly exhausting, and when you're a target seat, then there's even more expectation. But I'm doing well. I'm doing very well.
I've got to ask, I've never really spoken to someone who is in the middle of a campaign. What's your average day look like?
There really isn't an average day because there's always tons of emails to come in which need looking at and answering. There is huge expectations to try and get out on the doors and into town centres and speak to as many people as you can. You generally have media interest as well. So, later on I've got our local BBC radio coming to film me, which is an odd thing for a radio station to do, but there you go. And then you also have events. So last night we had a big climate change focused hustings in one of the towns in the constituency. So very often that means an hour or two beforehand trying to mug up and prepare what lines you're going to use and research not only your own party's policies and stance and think through where you fit into that, but also what the other parties are proposing to do and what the records of other candidates are. So it really varies from day to day.
Right. So what's the situation in Chippenham right now? How steep is the hill you have to climb to get yourself into Parliament?
It's a relatively steep hill. We had a slightly odd campaign last time because there were only 3 candidates and the gap is currently just over 16,000 votes. But the Lib Dems held the seat in 2010 and in 2015, 2017 we suffered from coalition a lot. This time Brexit really is framing the campaign because Lib Dems and Conservatives are the 2 parties basically who are slugging it out over this seat. We have very clear positions on that. And we are certainly making up an awful lot of headway as far as we can see. We had polls from April through to the beginning of the campaign which showed us winning the seat, but then polls always change. It's very difficult actually as a candidate because you're right in the middle of a kind of for me, an orange bubble to try and accurately assess what's going on. But we are getting a lot of very good reaction on the doorsteps. The reaction to yesterday evening's hustings was incredibly good. So, yeah, I think there is every chance. And the data that we ourselves pick up seems to indicate that we still have a good chance here.
Has your status as a transgender woman come up in the election at all, or is it something that people aren't that bothered about?
It's generally only media people who are interested.
Sorry, I laugh because I just realised I am the person you're talking about.
Well, yeah, but it's not just you. It's not just you. I mean, I did an interview for the local radio station last week, and one of the questions was, well, you could be the first trans MP. How important is that for you? And I'm saying, it's completely irrelevant to me. I want to be the MP for Chippenham. If I sort of aim to get the trans vote, okay, I might get 700. I need 28,000. 700 will help, but it's not going to win me an election. There are a handful of people who are make it an issue. So we have a pretty hostile environment for trans people. And so some of the people who make that environment hostile raise it as an issue, generally on social media, never face to face. But equally on the other side, I mean, I guess I've got quite a strong campaigning record for LGBT issues as well as, sort of wider LGBT issues as well as trans issues. And it is interesting that people I had somebody who answered the door and, my daughter wants to meet you. And she sort of called the daughter down and sort of had 5 minutes of hero worship, which was very uncomfortable with. Oh, it's very flattering, but that's not what I'm there for.
I think it's something you may have to get used to, because if you are successful in your campaign, you will be the first trans MP. That's going to mean a lot.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of media interest if I win. And that's true. And I know that the communities will have fairly high expectations of me. And I know that the media will turn to me as a spokesperson then on trans issues. And given that Gender Recognition Act is an issue in this campaign. I mean, it is buried beneath Brexit, buried beneath climate crisis, buried beneath public services, but it's that sort of fourth order issue beneath the other three. And it's likely that gender recognition will not go away in the next parliament. But I think that's, it's different being a media spokesperson or someone the media goes and talks to, as opposed to a kind of hero. I mean, I see it as incidental. I can't do anything about being trans. It's given me certain skills. The campaigning that I've done has given me a lot of experiences which I think are actually very relevant to being an MP. So the ability to speak relatively coherently, I hope at the moment, on particular issues, focus down to the key points, not be afraid of standing up. I mean, I gave evidence to Leveson, and that wasn't easy, sitting there in that blue chair picking the editors of the Daily Mail and the Sun to bits there, and generally knowing how to sort of put a campaign together. So yeah, there's a lot of relevant skills, but I'm not going to use them just for trans people. I have to use them for the people who've voted me in and the community in which I live.
Why did you decide to join up and campaign for the Liberal Democrats? What was it about that party in particular that appealed to you?
Okay. When I first turned 18, I was interested in elections. But I'm a mathematician who loves history and geography. And elections have lots and lots of numbers and maps and history. So for me, it was like, oh, this is really interesting. So I followed politics as a kind of academic exercise. I was interested in how things happened and how people changed their minds and why people voted the way they did. At the same time, I then went to university and discovered that there were different ways that different countries used of electing their politicians, and came to understand pretty quickly that the way that we elect ours is actually a pretty poor way in terms of determining proper representation for people. So I became an advocate for electoral reform by the age of 20. And Liberals, because it was Liberals in those days, were very, very strong on electoral reform. And the other thing that Liberals were very, very strong on was the environment. So at that time, we were sort of coming out of a period where we were worried about going into another ice age, but also about the level of pollution in the environment and the responsibilities, particularly that big business and industry had to stop polluting our environment. And those were two things that I cared very deeply about. And so it was that made me vote Liberal, and I've voted Liberal or Liberal Democrat ever since. In the campaigning that I did, it was actually very important to be seen as politically neutral. And that enabled me to get in front, specifically during the coalition government between 2010 and 2015, enabled me to get in front of a number of MPs of different parties and speak to them quite openly about the challenges that trans people faced. And so GRA reform came up as part of that, but I was going in on the media representation line and also looking at same-sex marriage as well as the real problems around healthcare, and not just the transition pathway, but the problems that trans people had accessing general healthcare. And so that was really, being politically neutral or being perceived as politically neutral was very important. And after the 2015 election, David Cameron made a speech where he said, and I might not get the quote exactly right, but something like, for too long, we've been a permissively tolerant society, saying to people that as long as you stay within the law, we'll leave you alone. Now, that was a threat. That's very, very dangerous. I was affected by that, because that is an implicit threat by a prime minister in peacetime to interfere in people's lives, even if they've done nothing wrong according to the law. And that made me snap. And I signed up. And I signed up out of anger. I didn't sign up expecting to be anybody. I signed up because I wanted to do something. And in fact, in 2015, Lib Dem's been reduced down to 8 MPs. If I had any desire to be an MP, joining the Lib Dems was a surefire way to kill any career prospects for that. So it that really wasn't in my thinking at the time. I then rock up to a new members meeting because we had a surge of members, and I sort of introduced myself and found that half the local party there already knew who I was. I was persuaded, shall we say, to go down to conference. I ended up speaking from the main stage at conference twice in my first ever conference. Not unprecedented, but certainly unusual. I was then persuaded to sign up to go on the parliamentary candidates list, which I did slightly reluctantly. I was then persuaded to stand for the local council on the basis that, okay, if I stand, you'll stop asking, and nearly won the seat. A solid Conservative seat, and we came within, I think, 19 or 21 votes of winning it. And then almost did the same thing in the borough council elections a few months later. So I then got approved as a parliamentary candidate. We then had the EU referendum. Lib Dems then put ourselves on a snap election footing, and we had 55 target seats, of which Chippenham was one. And I was persuaded to go for a target seat by a number of people in the party, including a couple of parliamentarians as well. You should go for one of these, you'd be good. So I put my papers in for Chippenham because we've got a family connection to the seat. And said to my wife, I said, oh, don't worry, I put my papers in, but don't worry, I won't get selected because, I'm a first-time candidate. Nobody has a clue. I've got no experience. There'll be loads of people after the seat and so on. And I went and got selected. I won the selection. So suddenly I found myself fighting a general election campaign in 2017. With
as can happen in life.
In a target seat, or nominally target seat at the start. And what the heck? That really wasn't where I was planning to go. But I sort of came to realize during that campaign, what I said earlier, that I had a number of skills from the campaigning experience that I had that I really did want to use for the greater good and the wider community. And so decided, I would go for it properly this time round. And so won reselection last year, and we've been working hard since spring 2018 to regain the seat, because goodness knows we need Liberal Democrats in Parliament, and the more Lib Dems we have in there, this is the party political bit, the more Lib Dems we have in there, the more we can stop the excesses of the other two parties. So that's what I really want to do, is to get in, represent the community, and be a strong voice for different communities.
Talking about the Liberal Democrats as a party, as you have referenced and are probably very well aware, there is some concern in the transgender community that the Liberal Democrats, because of their time in coalition with the Conservatives, aren't necessarily the party that can be trusted. What would you say to that?
Okay. We were in government, but we were not the government in 2010 to 2015. And if I'm brutally honest, I think there were mistakes made in the coalition. Nick Clegg has admitted that, and Joe Swinson has admitted that. We had been out of government for decades. The last time we had a Liberal in government was in 1945. So they were kind of working out how it would go. What I will say is that we are a very different party now than we were even in 2015. We have around about 130,000 members. When I joined in 2015, I was member number 35,000 and something. So you can see that 80 to 90,000 people have joined since I joined, and that makes up 3/4 of the party. We have experience now in government. We know what we would do and how we would approach it. But we are faced with two people who are being put forward by the Conservatives and Labour Party as candidates for Prime Minister, who people on doorsteps really do not like. And so we have said we will not put either of them into number 10 Downing Street. And if there is a hung parliament and either one of them is put in by their own party, they will be leading a minority government, and we will treat each issue on a vote-by-vote basis as it comes. Now, having said all that, there is a slight risk, I suppose, that Boris Johnson may lose his seat. There is a risk that if Jeremy Corbyn doesn't win this election, then the Labour Party will recognise that they need a different leader. So it is entirely possible that by the end of this year, Johnson and Corbyn may not be leaders of their respective parties. And that then may change the situation. But I will say that there is absolutely no desire amongst my colleagues that I can see, and there is very little parity between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives at this point. The Conservatives wanted to haul us out of Europe, possibly with no deal, plunging our economy off the cliff. We think it's much, much better to stay as full members of the EU with our feet under the table, helping make the rules rather than simply receiving them. And that, I think, is a core philosophical difference. And I cannot see that there would be any desire to put the Tories in number 10 in any way, shape or form. There are issues with the Labour Party as well. I don't know how insurmountable those would be. So, yeah, we take the trust issue on the chin. And actually, we get what I get on the doorstep is, can't trust any of you. I don't trust any of you.
Yeah, that's what my dad says all the time.
And I think part of the problem that we had in 2010, we were a challenger party. People had very high expectations of us. Government is messy. Government is difficult. You have to make decisions which will disappoint people all the time. So governments inevitably run out of popularity. So, yeah, that's tough. And in 2015, we were no longer a challenger party. We were a party of government. And that changes people's perceptions.
There was another thing that happened recently. Are you aware of... Well, I'm sure you're absolutely aware of the case of Philip Lee, who was accepted into the Liberal Democrat ranks. He joined the Liberal Democrats in dramatic fashion. Like, it was almost as if it was written by Aaron Sorkin. He has had some pretty nasty things about gay people in the past, and many in the LGBT Lib Dems cancelled their membership, resigned. I think the leader of that resigned.
Yeah.
Do you think that it comes into conflict with the Liberal Democrats' constitution? Because in the constitution it says that that the party has to champion social justice first, if I've got that right.
Yeah. Okay. The Philip Lee situation, there were various things that he put forward and voted on in terms of same-sex marriage and testing for bloodborne diseases. So he referenced HIV and hepatitis B and C. Now, there is a slight issue with medics in Parliament. I have to say this, in that they kind of, Sarah Wollaston does this a bit as well, and she's also joined the Lib Dems. They get very focused on particular things, particularly from a medical perspective. So the issue was that people had jumped to conclusions from the various things that had been done. So on the bloodborne diseases, Philip had put forward a motion which was designed to be what's called a probing motion, which was effectively asking the government to come clean about its stated preparation on various things. But it was never intended to be put to a vote. And on same-sex marriage, his view was that the state should just butt out of marriage. So it wasn't that gay couples, same-sex couples shouldn't be allowed to marry. He was just thinking the state should just recognise unions, and two people should be allowed to register that union, and it's the same. And at the time, there was a lot of discussion about the term marriage and how much that built into the patriarchy and all of that kind of stuff. So the situation when he crossed the floor, and it was absolutely a dramatic moment because it meant that Johnson had lost his majority at that moment. The issue was that because those assumptions had been made and he was immediately then painted as homophobic without even talking to him. Now, the leader, the chair of LGBT plus Lib Dems resigned about half an hour later. It seemed to have been slightly prepared, I would say. And she was complaining that the party hadn't consulted them. There are, that effectively what she was saying, she wanted a veto on somebody joining, based on a set of assumptions. And that seemed to me to be quite a weak argument. I was in the position I am in, was then asked repeatedly over the next day and a half for my view, and I said I didn't know. I don't know enough. There is a lot of assumptions, and I want to talk to him first. So we had actually a candidates briefing that afternoon. I then had a meeting in Westminster, and I bumped into Philip Lee that evening and said, I could do with having a chat with you, introduce myself. And he actually stood there for 15 minutes, and we chatted for 15 minutes over these two particular things. And he explained his position in terms of bloodborne diseases. People who come into the country are already tested for some bloodborne diseases, and he was wondering why that isn't extensively tested. It wasn't to specifically bar people, although if there is a public health angle there. And I came away from that 15 minutes thinking he's not homophobic. I can't see that there's homophobic. There's a good reason behind his position. He explained what he would do to support LGBT rights, and I thought, fair enough. So on that basis, I'm quite happy with him being in the party. Any political party has to be of necessity, if it wants to win power, it has to be a broad church. It has to accept a wide variety of opinions. There are certain opinions that our party is stamping down on very, very firmly. And transphobia and homophobia are two of them. So I have no problem with Philip being in the party. I don't consider him to be homophobic. I have met him on a number of occasions since and get on with him very well.
Fair enough. But you understand how people might take pause with the perception of allowing a man who may or may not have been trying to block HIV positive immigrants from entering the country. That couldn't have come at a good time for the Liberal Democrats, really, especially after being in coalition with the government. Do you think that it may have been a better idea to have just quietly let him go?
You would have to have very good reasons to let him go. And if he isn't homophobic, then why would you do that? So, and you're sort of tying us into the coalition and the Conservatives. It's worth also saying we have 3 former Labour MPs join us, Chuka Umunna, Luciana Berger, and I'm going to struggle with the third one, Angela Smith up in Yorkshire. And, Angela has also made some fairly problematic comments in the past. The issue is not so much the record of the past, but where they're going in the future. And if we demand purity from all of our politicians, you ain't going to get very many people coming forwards. And secondly, it means that you're obstructing people who might have very worthwhile skills and very worthwhile views and experiences from coming forwards on the basis that somebody somewhere has deemed them not to be acceptable. And I think that's a dangerous position to take.
Helen Belcher, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been a pleasure, and good luck in the campaign.
And thank you for asking, Michelle. It's been a real pleasure here as well. And let's hope the people of Chippenham vote me in.
Fingers crossed. So what did you make of that, Ashley?
Well, I think, a lot of interesting stuff in there. And I, as before the interview, you described Helen Belcher as an absolute veteran of the trans community, which is very much true. So I sort of followed her on Twitter and have been aware of her work for years. And I can't remember if I've met her. It seems plausible, but I don't know. There's always one thing or another, isn't there? But while we were listening to that, I did just kind of want to pick up on the stuff about Philip Lee, the defecting Tory MP, who dramatically, as you noted, crossed the floor from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats. Because actually, since that interview that you said you recorded in the early part of last week, a couple of other things have come up. Specifically, earlier today, 5th of December, Philip Lee was on a Mumsnet interview suggesting that basically separate prison spaces for trans prisoners would be an appropriate and sensitive thing to do. And obviously there's a bunch of stuff wrong with that. There's a whole bunch of stuff wrong with what the people on Mumsnet were saying, but that's not really his fault as such. I have to say, in the light of that, and in the light of the things that he has gone on record as sort of saying, and voting record and so on, I am not wholly convinced by what Helen was saying about Philip Lee. What do you think?
Well, I think that if Philip Lee is what Helen Belcher says he is really not making it easy for us to believe her. He really isn't. He is really she gives this interview to a media outlet, and I didn't enter into it wanting. I felt that I had to raise this point, but I also wanted the piece in my ideal world to be about Helen Belcher being a trans politician, maybe even winning her election, and being this whole symbolic thing, and maybe even a story of hope. But now, thanks to Philip Lee's catastrophic performance on Mumsnet today.
Yeah, it was a bit of a slow motion accident.
Yeah, if we were a bigger publication, this would be such a fucking foot in the mouth for the whole Liberal Democrats party, because he is like everything he does just reeks of anti-LGBT, and I would love to believe that he is just bumbling into just I just really wanted to, stop certain diseases from coming into the country and all this other stuff, which actually, when I say it like that sounds bad on its own. Yeah, okay, no, I don't buy it. I don't buy that particular point, but as I said to you before we started recording, I am a straight woman, and I was interviewing a gay woman about homophobia in her political party, so it didn't feel like there was much I could necessarily challenge her on. I took her word for it, but after this, I'm just I don't think Philip Lee's good, and I don't think it looks good for the Liberal Democrats that he's around.
No, it doesn't. It does not, and it's going to put a lot of people off. Well, maybe not a lot of people. I mean, maybe some of the stuff that came up in the interview, like coalition government, etc. Those things are also putting people off the Liberal Democrats. But this is, it just isn't a good look. And it's if I get it that you have to be a broad church, but you at least need to be cohesive and kind of hit the same points as each other and not come out with things that seem to contradict long-held principles.
Well, this is right there in their constitution as a party. They have to champion social justice at the very core, and this guy has been failing at it, and he's making other people in the Liberal Democrats, other good people that I've been talking to for different stories and stuff, he's making them look foolish by backing him. And he then goes off a week after we talked to Helen Belcher and does this on fucking Mumsnet, which I'm surprised that a party who be trying to sell their pro-trans credentials all the way through this election, like the Liberal Democrats, would even send one of their people to Mumsnet.
Well, quite.
If that's what happened, he could have gone there totally on his own.
That's true. But, however, that was one part of, an otherwise quite lengthy and in-depth and quite interesting interview, and I don't want to belabor the point, because lots of people say lots of different things in the run-up to an election, so...
Yeah, regardless of whatever's going on with Philip Lee, Helen Belcher is someone that I have met a fair few times and seen her do some incredible stuff. She's been working in the background for a lot of things for the trans community for years, so I believe that when it comes to the day-to-day, she would make an excellent MP for the people of Chippenham. And she's taken a real, Danica Rowan, the American, I want to say councillor, she's not, but it's the American equivalent of a local council she's on. She is basically going there for the people of Chippenham first, which is great. And she's made no allusions to the fact that she is going to be very limited in what she can do directly for trans people. But she's right, having a trans person in the room for many of the discussions that go on around the Houses of Parliament and Westminster will be a tremendous thing. So with some reservations about the party and certain things around this Philip Lee guy, I think that she would be a fucking astonishing public servant, and I really wish her all the best in the upcoming election.
Best of luck to Helen Belcher and all the other trans and non-binary candidates, and best of luck to all of us in terms of the results of the election, which we will be finding out about and probably slightly panicking about when we're recording the next episode.
Yeah, we're going to have a meeting about this at some point to figure out how the hell we're going to do the next episode, but that's for next episode. Come back next week to find out what the hell we decided to do. Leave them on a cliffhanger, Ashley. Always leave them on a cliffhanger.
Always leave them wanting more. So on that note, good night and good luck.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.